Welcome to the second session of the Biological Thought and the Journal Left seminars. Last time, hello. Hi. Last week we were reading excerpts from Carl Voigt's Physiologische Briefe and his text on the task of generalization in 1849. One of the main sort of things that we talked about there was Voigt's conception of mechanical materialism and what that meant. Voigt as a physiologist and somebody who was sort of staking out an argument really about the relative value of natural science vis-a-vis philosophy and also theology. I guess the way that, so this week we're looking at Friedrich Engels, excerpts from Dialektik der Natur, and I guess the way that this, there are multiple relations between the mechanical materialists and obviously the Marxist materialists. There was a political dispute that we touched on last week between Marx himself and Carl Voigt, who we were reading, which was based on a sort of misunderstanding potentially about Voigt's alliance with the French, and it resulted in a sort of, a legal process and so on. The mechanical materialists and the Marxist materialists definitely saw themselves as defending alternative conceptions of materialist philosophy. And the Dialektik der Natur, which we're going to talk about today, was Engels's contribution, or one of his unfinished, ultimately, contributions to developing a dialectical materialism that explicitly understood itself as a countering mechanical materialist worldview. So for Engels and Marx, they were a little bit on the side of the neo-Kantians that we talked about last time. They thought that mechanical materialism was reductive and was, as they put it, vulgar and naive, and they believed that a dialectical approach to understanding the natural world, particularly Engels in this text, was more sophisticated. And so Dialektik der Natur, as you will have read from the Haldane preface to the 1939 or 1940 English version, is a text that it was never published during Engels' lifetime. Only one or two of the articles that appeared in it came out shortly after Engels' death. It's unfinished, but it was written over about a 10-year period from the early 1870s, 1872, 73 through to 82, 83, during a period when Engels was also writing a work that was eventually published, Anti-Dühring, which was a reply to Eugen Dühring's alternative conception of socialism that he was developing at that time. And both of these texts, there's some crossover in terms of content. In both of them, Engels is trying to apply the principles or the method of dialectical reasoning to the natural world and to the natural sciences, so beyond the sphere of human history and society. And that has generated, that attempt has generated a lot of controversy in the years since, and also at the time. And maybe that's one of the things we can maybe talk about, how successful do we think that is, what kind of project do we think that is. So one thing that I would want to say about this, particularly, so this text is as I've said, engaging with natural science and with the natural world from a dialectical standpoint, a dialectical materialist standpoint. Obviously, in this space, I'm sort of most interested in the life sciences and ideas around biology, and Darwin comes up a lot in the text, as you will have noticed, and Engels read On the Origin of Species. He acquired one of the 1,250 copies that sold out on the first day it was published. He read it within a few days or weeks, and he wrote to Marx very enthusiastically about it in 1859 already. Marx read it the following year, and was also keen to agree with Engels that they believed that Darwin had sort of established from that scientific perspective the basis for their understanding of history and society. So there's a lot of Darwinian influence in what we've been reading, and I suppose that would be one of the focus points of what we might want to talk about in terms of what's happening here, how Engels is engaging with biological ideas and how they might be of political significance for some of the things that he is saying. So we've got, last week we just talked through each of the texts. We've got a preface in English written by Haldane, who's a British communist biologist. And then we've got 3 sections from Engels in German, or some people have read it in English, so we'll talk about it in both. Does anybody have any kind of initial comments that they would like to make about what was the impression that people had from reading this? Maybe actually we'll just go around the table once, because we did that last week, but we've got different people in the room now, so it would be helpful to do that. So you're going to do that.
I'm Artemis. We know each other, we track together. So, I'm Artemis, I'm a historian and I'm working on 19th century music. And I'm a visiting fellow here as well.
Hi, I'm Federico. I'm a PhD student here, first year, and work on German Jewish thought of early 20th century, especially on Ernst Bloch. And I'm here at the Ernst Bloch Center.
Hi, I'm Lydia. I'm from Royal University. I'm doing a PhD there in philosophy, mainly on Schelling and Hegel and species concepts. So,
I'm Carolina, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Nottingham at Critical Studies Centre, and I'm doing a PhD on body politic and family public conceptual innovation, which I will be speaking very loud in a low voice about. It's not official yet.
Oh no, you're being recorded, you know? Yeah. Oh no.
Hi, I'm Moir.
What was your name, sorry?
Moir.
Roya. Okay, welcome. So, yeah, what were people's impressions of the texts in general? Anything you want to say?
Well, just as a general comment, I found quite impressive that some of the intuitions that Engels had during his years, so at the end of the 19th century, have been proved empirically just I think 6 years ago, or 60 or 70 years ago. I'm talking about the geological discoveries of the drifts of the continent, which was at that age just theory.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it seems to me that he, I'm focusing mostly on the Einleitung, on the introduction, when he develops his history of science.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that he provides a very detailed and quite complete history of science for that time, and he was really up to date. Also, in a way, guessing which would be the development of science in the following years, and this for me is quite impressive. And this is the first general comment that I would say. Another impression is the way in which he sketches this history of science is itself dialectical. There are these 3 moments from the ancient Greeks to modern science of the early Renaissance to his contemporary science, and so there are three moments clearly defined from mattering movement to a fixed matter, and then again to matter and movement. So there are those three.
Yeah, that's a very good point actually. He sort of does bring it back to at the end there, where he's talking about, we're back with the conception of antiquity essentially, which I thought was quite striking, and I wonder really how sketchy he is being there in terms of what the conception of. There were lots of, there were obviously competing theories of matter in ancient Greece as well, so being a bit, perhaps painting a bit of a broad brush. But I had a similar thought about it's in the article on work, the role of work in the evolution of the human, where he's sort of sketching a bit of a speculative history of the human being. He's talking about, the role of cooking, or the role of fire and the role of cooking. And primatologists, like contemporary primatologists, have done quite. This is a thesis that's still being defended by people. That cooking was a kind of major motor of human evolution. So there again, I thought, on the one hand, he's sort of making these big claims in this very speculative way, but then on the other hand, what he's saying is still being argued by contemporary empirical scientists to some extent.
But to some extent, these are questions that are never going to be resolved, right? We will never have definitive proof about these things, and probably these streams of theories about what made human evolve will run in parallel. So I don't think it's particularly prophetic. What I found interesting in regards to that is that yes, it's very daring, and of course the whole project it's ideological, right? So to construct an ideology, you need daring propositions that have to be believed within this context that we're reading now. And to me, I appreciated the argument, and especially in that part that he says that our societies are used to attributing those developments to the work of the mind. And instead of seeing how hard labor contributed very significantly to man becoming the civilized being in the end. And there it shined through, because before that I was wondering why this massive jump. It's very interesting that he starts from the earliest humans, the apes, let's say, and then very quickly he makes this fantastic jump from, and then they started cooking, and then we get art, science, industry, and the nation state. Which for a philosopher, for a political philosopher, is a massive jump. He's sort of ignoring all the social and political structures that are the backbone of his political theory to get to this argument. So I was wondering about this gap, until I realized that his main thesis is that if we look at biology, we see that by conception we've learned to look at humans as a product of the mind instead of the laboring hands. And I think that if this was completed, it is incomplete. No,
it's incomplete.
Yeah,
it's unfinished.
I think that this very daring beginning would have materialized into something much more elaborate in terms of the argument would have been much more rich. I think that this perspective for me sort of.
I think that of course, it is an ideological project. You're right. although, you know, I think Engels clearly sees himself as doing scientific history as well. But I think, I mean, the other element of that, which is, I think also part of his main argument, is this idea that evolution is not just something that happens from outside to the human being, but it's also something that is dialectically produced by human work. That work is a component, you know, in the evolutionary process. Seems to me to be a core part of the argument here as well. Anybody else got any comments that they want us to kick off with, and then we can maybe talk about each text in a bit more detail, like initial impressions.
I found it very interesting how he kind of portrayed this account of history as based on matter, and how it culminated in this almost like a description of an apocalypse, which then was kind of overcome. And it just was very interesting to me on like quite a few levels. This very moment of the introduction when he started describing how the universe will collapse and that everything that is alive will also fall and decay, and that it kind of is an element of this philosophy of, well, somehow historical progress, right? So that this kind of dialectical account is there also on the level of what life is in general, and also it just kind of very much reminds me of all those accounts of revolution, and I thought, okay, yes, if we are to root history in matter and still think of it in terms of a possibility of revolution, then we have to imagine everything as we know it disappearing, right? And that this element of ultimate death is there, and it's somehow reworked, and it was somehow also visible for me in the fragment in that text on the labour in the transition from ape to man. That maybe this is I don't know if it's not too far of a stretch, but somehow the way that he described this story that we all very much know in a way, that this might be revolutionary in terms of science for that time, but it also kind of has a lot to do with Darwin and just kind of this story of how the humanity arose, and this kind of story of greatness of how we through labour developed and kind of differentiated ourselves from the apes and whatnot, and kind of like still ends up in this very apocalyptical description of what it brought upon us in terms of just capitalism, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
The apes, capitalism, destruction.
Yeah.
I realized that.
These are the three moments.
I think that's the three.
It's capitalism destruction. Okay. I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, and it goes back a bit to what Artemis said before about, you know, this perhaps some of these ideas are just perennial and never going to be answered and so on. Of course, you know, the idea of human evolution is not a perennial idea. The idea of a naturalistic, non-theological account of how human beings evolved from ape-like creatures is resolutely modern. So it's not something that's been being debated perennially like that. And I think maybe then it's worth thinking about these 2 or 3 different kinds of conceptions of progress and change that are at work here. The revolutionary, and we can talk a bit more about that, because I think there's something quite similar in Engels's account of matter, you know, in being involved in this eternal cycle, to the view that we read about last week. The revolutionary, the evolutionary, so this progressive complexification of life that he's also talking about, which is obviously very close to a Darwinian, is related to a Darwinian conception. And then this sort of apocalyptic thing.
So is it related or is it based on? That's what I'm trying to understand. because obviously this is an up-to-date reader who's interested in the social sciences, and he reads all the development and the natural sciences, and reads all the developments, and then he gives them this spin towards his own political reading of. That's closer to what I was trying to say before about this not being prophetic. It's just, to me, it's just a person who is incredibly read on the topic. I don't know if he was incredibly read, but well read. And he's a visionary in the sense that he picked the theory that was proven right. Later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about him in the British Library reading these things.
Yeah. Well, the question of the question of based on or related to, I think, is maybe that is not the most productive way of approaching it, just because, on the one hand, Marx and Engels's, so historical materialism is itself a product of this historicisation, the idea of, the historicisation of the understanding of nature, the end of natural history, as Wolfgang Penning's called it, that Engels is talking about himself, the shift from a static view of the natural world to a dynamic view. And, Darwinian evolutionary theory and prior theories of evolution, and also, I would say, sort of social evolutionary theory of Marxism, belong to the thing, they're part of the phenomenon that Engels is describing here as well. So I think, it's an intellectual constellation, isn't it? Really? Yeah. Any other thoughts about? Did you manage to do the reading?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. Any thoughts? What was your impression of the text?
Yeah, well, I enjoyed reading it. I thought that it would be. I didn't expect him to be quite as. I didn't expect to sympathise with it as much as I did.
Right.
Because people always talk about, I suppose what you were saying about very kind of ideological use of science, as if it's quite fishy, or like that dialectics being forced on the sort of logical mode of things is really being forced on the material. But I felt like it actually, the way he presented it didn't seem too much like these. It didn't seem, it didn't seem unreasonable.
No.
Also, a couple of things that struck me as I expected. So obviously, with the ape to man piece, I expected more. I thought there would be. I was surprised by how much he acknowledged animal cognition.
Yeah.
That really surprised me, because I expected that because of his whole story about what's distinguishing humanity from the other animals, I expected him to be less. It seems almost like sort of the modern kind of trend to see humans and animals as more of a continuum. And I expected it to be wildly different from that, and it doesn't seem like it is, so that quite surprised me as well.
I thought that too. There's lots of animal studies people to get.
He compares us to goats a lot. He uses goat example all the time.
And he's on about teaching your parrot to swear and stuff. And it's like, that's pretty funny kind of perspective. Now, I also thought that was and it reminded me a little bit, we'll come to that, but the theory, the little sort of excursus on language that he has, where he sort of says, with some animals like dogs and horses, you can almost perceive that they regret not being able to speak. It's like, oh, that's where everyone gets it from then, right? So,
It's like when you see a dog and you're talking to it, that sort of does this thing with its head, like it's trying to...
No, I think so. I thought that was very forward thinking as well. Let's maybe talk through the introduction then, and then we can look at the evolution piece, and then if we have time we can also look a little bit at some of the notes maybe and talk about the beginning preface. The introduction, place to start. So, what I sort of understood was going on in this introduction is that we've got, first of all, an account of the history of science, as you said, Federico, followed by, essentially, so that goes up to page 320 in the German version, and then we've got this little sort of passage that separates that from, and I think that passage was, he imported that into Anti-Düring. So we've got a passage about so sind wir dann wieder zurückgekehrt zu der Anschauungsweise der großen Gründe der griechischen Philosophie, so where he gets back to the Greek philosophy. And then straight after that we've got an account of like cosmic history, basically, from the beginning to today. So those were the sort of two sections of that text, as far as I could make out. So maybe we can just talk through what people found interesting about this.
I did find it really ironic when he, on the first page, when he, I read the English translation, so I'm not sure if it's the first page, but it's the second paragraph, where he describes the, I think it's already the Renaissance account of science and of natural sciences, and he says that he kind of praises this broad upbringing and just a very broad perspective on science, and he says this is nothing in common with this bourgeois kind of closed perspective. And at the same time, he really describes a very privileged kind of history of the bourgeois, like that those people who could have this perspective. Well, for sure not working class. I mean, and of course, like this is just a fact about science then, but it just struck me somehow. Maybe it was just anecdotal, but.
Yeah, so there's kind of a cognitive dissonance going on, maybe from his perspective. Although this is obviously, I mean, the Anti-Düring appeared before it was published as a book in Vorwärts, I think, so like it was serialised for a broad social democratic and working class audience, you know, so it was reaching a wider public, and it was part of that sort of popularisation drive that we talked about last week as well. I thought what was interesting to me about this, when I started reading this, I was like, okay, so he's talking about, you know, the big names of science, the kind of great man, like history of science here, which was quite a contrast with Vogt last week, because, you know, he was there all talking about, I'm not going to name names. I mean, he did actually at the end. He sort of listed a few of the luminaries of his time, but he was saying, you know, science is about truth. It's not about names. It's not about personalities. And so he was quite insistent that he didn't want to do this kind of history. So there's a definite contrast, I thought, between Engels and Vogt in that respect. He seems quite happy to, you know, do the greatest hits sort of story.
Also, it's surprising that, so you mentioned that he focuses on people, and I was reading maybe a couple of years ago or last year some texts about Boris Hessen, I think. So some kind of Marxist history of science, and they will describe, so they'll look at things like the development of a crank and then use that to describe to kind of talk about revolutions or developments in science. And so it's interesting that he's not doing that in a way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he's doing something a little more like that in the proportion of work in the evolution of ape to man essays. Maybe
that's true. Yeah.
Maybe that's closer to that sort of model. But yeah, I mean, I think this is the sort of the big names, isn't it? He's looking at here.
Yeah. So when he's talking about the development of the human, he is using a kind of technological model, but then here when he's talking about the history of science, it's not so much.
And there is a contradiction. I mean, I think I think Carolina's point is very valid. This is in a way. I mean, to be Benjaminian about it, it's the triumphal procession, right? It's the sort of historicist, bourgeois model, method of doing history is what Benjamin would describe it as potentially. So that's interesting. I mean, I think it's just worth being, reflective on it.
Yeah, but the point of the list of great men is to make a statement about the division of labor again. I mean, literally, that's what he said, that these people, this list of great bourgeois people, were whole men who could do all of the sciences and all of the arts without. So.
Yeah. So
it's a different argument from. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the point was just that it's complex, that he's saying that, but at the same time, the gesture is to repeat that pattern of names, if you like. Yeah.
Instead of.
I mean, it's just an interesting position, like towards the division of labor, to have this wholesome person rather than, I don't know, a wholesome, like in Vogt, we saw a picture of a society working together on science, like this beehive and stuff like that. But there was no individual who just had all the knowledge. So that's just what I meant. It's just kind of cringy.
But no, you're right. He does make that point. He makes the point that you just said, Artemis, that this is. I'm trying to find exactly where he said that, but that these figures are capable of doing this because there is a division of labour, right? So he recognises that. So we first get him talking about biology more specifically on page 314 of the German version. Sorry, I've marked up the German version, but I have to. So he talks about the development of the special sciences, especially from the sort of end of the Renaissance period that he is holding up as like the kind of big, beginning of the scientific revolution, I suppose. And then he sort of says at the end of that paragraph that it was only, he singles out biology and says, okay, in this period, so in the Renaissance and the early modern period, biologists were still basically collecting and observing examples and massive material. We hadn't got to the stage yet where these things were being compared or investigated in their sort of geographical distribution or anything like that. Linnaean classification was as far as we come at this point, and that leads him into this thesis about the transition. I mean, I found that also, I have to say, now that I think about it, quite interesting, because when that book, Wolfram Henny's Das Ende der Naturgeschichte, came out in like 79 or something, The End of Natural History, that was considered quite a revolutionary argument, this sort of Foucauldian account of how a static conception of nature gives way to a dynamic one at the end of the 18th century. you know, from an empirical perspective, of course, Foucault makes that point sketchy himself, but, and then I was like, okay, but Engels is already sort of saying that here. So these things, again, are like things that you think people only come up with at a certain point in time, and actually you realise that the contemporaries recognise that too. So, so then we get this, this main claim that what characterised this period is the idea of, the period prior to his own time, was this idea of von der absoluten Unveränderlichkeit der Natur, so complete sort of immutability of nature. Which obviously Darwin gives the kind of death blow to. I mean, that's the implication here, isn't it? And he connects it also to the transition. I mean, that was another point that I thought was interesting because, first of all, he says Leibniz, is that right? Leibniz kills off theology. Oh no, Copernicus, sorry. Copernicus is the posthumous publication of On the Movement of the Celestial Spheres, or whatever the English title is, kind of gives the death blow to a theological worldview. And then later on, we get him saying that in the 18th century, die Wissenschaft stark noch tief in der Theologie. So he sort of contradicts himself there, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I don't think it's a strong contradiction, because I just think that on one side you have possibility of negating the central place of the Earth in the universe and explain all the in a Cartesian way all the relationship between the single bodies in physics in a mechanical way. And this is one side, and this is what cardinal theology is on one side, but just nominally, because I think that his argument is that de facto, since in any case this scientific account is deeply linked with the fixity of everything, this is what the early scientists couldn't get rid of. And so there are two movements. One is just, I would say, nominal, so explain the universe with the matter itself, and the other is not just nominal, but also explaining the movement of things, and also provide another account of matter, which is what he is trying to do here. And this is what I find really interesting. So his notion of movement and matter put together is something relatively new, I would say, that even if we look at the ancient Greeks, we cannot find it properly. If I think about the Greek concept of hule as a matter, it is kind of passivity inside. It's like a substrate which is capable of being placed, or how to say, of being shaped, but without movement in itself. Movement comes from outside. Whereas the revolution, in the sense that Engels is trying to do, is to say that yes, we're not only explaining how the universe works by mechanical interactions or forces, but we are also saying that movement is intrinsic to the matter, and this is so the big leap he is trying to do. So in this sense, it's not entirely contradicting.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that probably I overstated that, but I think so. Yeah, the reference to Copernicus, and then the later idea that science is still kind of embedded in a theological worldview. I think, yeah, that's probably right. It's not a huge contradiction, but it struck me as a contradiction because he doesn't really go into. Then when he mentions it again, on page 315 in the German, die Wissenschaft stark tief in der Theologie. Überall sucht sie und findet sie als letztes einen Anstoß von außen, der aus der Natur selbst nicht zu erklären. Okay, so that actually does kind of unpack it a bit, doesn't it? So what does he mean by this, being theological still, is that it's looking for a cause from outside that isn't from within the natural world itself. And then further down in that same paragraph, he states his approach, which is die Welt aus sich selbst zu erklären. So that's the non-theological, natural scientific mode of proceeding as he sort of defines it there. So no, I think you're right there. I mean, just a word on the idea of matter. So Ludwig Büchner's Vor Kraft und Stoff comes out in 1855. I mean, it's a popular work, right? But it goes through multiple, I think 19 editions or something. And in that book, I mean, the primary argument of that book is that matter and force cannot be separated, so that energy and material are, united. So that idea was definitely in the background by the time Engels is writing this. I just thought on page 316 at the top of the German, he says here, vergessen wir nicht, dass diese veraltete Naturanschauung, and he's talking about the view of nature as static, obwohl an allen Ecken und Enden durchlöchert durch den Fortschritt der Wissenschaft. So although this view has been, pricked by progress in science, die ganze erste Hälfte des 19. Jahrhunderts beherrscht hat und noch jetzt der Hauptsache nach auf allen Schulen gelehrt wird. So I thought that was him having a bit of a side kind of slight at the mechanical materialists, possibly. This idea of static nature is still kind of present in many schools of scientific thought. And then, what do people think about that? That he sort of goes, okay, so how does this change? We've got this view of nature as sort of static and eternally unchanging. What punctures that? It's Kant for him, which I thought was pretty surprising, or not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Did anyone else find that surprising?
Definitely, especially if you look at the third critique, that's the kind of sense, for me at least, for the most explicit and kind of scientific way, the content scientific way of proving how nature is teleological,
Yeah.
So this, in a sense, is exactly what Engels should have posed somehow to.
Right, but so in the third critique, he's still defending a mechanistic view of nature, so that's right. So I thought it was surprising because also, I don't know, I'm not across the literature on the natural scientific reception of Kant, but I wonder, what impact this text actually did have on the natural science of the day. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I find it really interesting when he introduces Kant. He later on, so 10 lines after Kant, he quotes Newton, and he is against Newton. This is the striking fact, because so page 1216 in the German one. May I read the English version?
Go ahead, yeah. do. I just don't have the English.
And so he says the first breach in this petrified outlook on nature was made not by a natural scientist but by a philosopher. So Kant, in 1755, it appeared Kant's Allgemeine Naturgeschichte und Theorie des Himmels. The question of the first impulse was abolished. The earth and the whole solar system appeared as something that had come into being in the course of time. If the great majority of the natural scientists had a little less of the repugnance to thinking that Newton expressed in the word in physics, beware of metaphysics, they would have been compelled from the single brilliant discovery of Kant's to draw conclusions that would have spared them endless deviations and immeasurable amounts of time and labor wasted in false direction. So in this small section, well, half of the section, what is striking for me is that, in a way, Engels is suggesting that we need metaphysics in order to understand physics.
That's right, yeah.
And this is how, as I understand, his dialectical thought works, and it can be applied also to the history of science. Because it's, so paradoxically, Kant, one of the most teleological thinkers, was able, in this text, evidently, I don't know this text, but also in the first century, to separate, and so to grant an autonomous realm to the natural sciences without questioning the first origin of the world, of the universe. And this allowed natural sciences to develop further on. And, but it was only thanks to a philosophical claim that this was enabled. And this is very interesting, in contrast with, for example, Vogt view of rejecting the whole philosophy as it is.
Yeah.
So it's more or less, so it's quite clear that he stands on the opposite side here.
Yeah. Absolutely, no, I think that's right, and that comes back later in the introduction, I think, doesn't it? Where he, we'll get to that. But I think it's towards the end where he talks about scientists ignoring. How does he put it? It's this point basically that exactly physics needs metaphysics. That philosophy and a philosophical and specifically a dialectical way of understanding the natural world is, you know, can get natural scientists, he argues, out of some of the kind of antinomies that they find themselves in. He comes back to that point, I think, in a while. You know, I thought that is incredibly striking because Engels is like the anti-metaphysical, you know, he's a critic of metaphysics, right? But he recognises that it has some useful qualities.
I think that we have to ask ourselves what he meant here with metaphysics. And probably today we would call this metaphysic epistemology, I would say. So understanding the extent to which our scientific knowledge could go, and so question the limit, but also the possibilities of scientific knowledge, is what we generally call epistemology. And so basically is, I think that Engels stands for a non-naive scientific explanation. So a scientific explanation which also bears in mind the philosophical problems of it. So not metaphysics as the discipline of the fixed stars, but metaphysics as what are the limits of our understanding of physics.
I interpreted this a bit differently, I have to say. So first of all, this text, which I also haven't read by Kant, Allgemeine Naturgeschichte, I understand that from what Engels says here to be a work of, you know, speculative ontology, basically, like a work about, it's a work about the natural, cosmic history, right? So speculative cosmogony or something. And so not really about the limits of knowledge or natural scientific knowledge per se.
Is it not pre-critical?
It's pre-critical, yeah. So there's that point as well, which is he's not yet reflecting on the conditioned possibility of knowledge. But and so that, I mean, so in a way it's metaphysics in a very classical sense, right? Just it's speculative, it's speculation about the origins of the universe, and Kant is doing it in a way that describes development through time. That seems to be the point that Engels is making here. One, in other texts, so in Socialism, Utopian or Scientific, for example, when Engels talks about metaphysics, what he seems to be, the way that he seems to be using it there is to describe a theological worldview, so an idealist worldview of which is oriented on minimizing the developmental character and sort of contingent character of reality. So here, I mean, this here, Physik hüte dich vor der Metaphysik, is a quote, right? It's a quote from Newton.
Yeah.
So he's ventriloquizing Newton talking about metaphysics. So I guess that has something to bear on the meaning of the word metaphysics in this context. But yeah, elsewhere, I mean, he is an anti-metaphysica, but in a very specific sense of that word, I think.
I'm just wondering if it's not just a way to point to the fact that Kant is considered as a metaphysician, and that if only they weren't that closed in their exactly kind of cell of laboring the physics and look at all the others writings about the subject matter, they would have discovered this nebula hypothesis much earlier.
Yeah.
Which I suppose it's, now that I read it, I think like this is the only thing that he means in Kant, this very particular hypothesis that he came up with.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not really.
It would be consistent with the thesis of the whole man, right? Back to the kind of a person who's wholesome in their mastery of different interdisciplinary.
And it's also this point that he points at Kant, because I feel like there were other emergent theories. So why he picks, I don't know about it. It's strange to me.
No, I do find it odd. I mean, have you got another thinker in mind, particularly, or?
I mean, even sort of like Democritus or something.
Yeah.
You can, so he could have gone back pretty far if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But what's just to, maybe I misunderstood this, what's the core argument here in this section? So I think that...
Well, I think the core argument, as I understand it, is that the static conception of the natural world is interrupted not by a natural scientist, but by this particular text of Kant, a philosopher. So it hangs on it's part of him building this argument that we need philosophy, right?
Yes, but why specifically this work of Kant? Because I think that he says that, for me, as I understand it, the key point is that the question of the first impulse was abolished.
Yeah.
This is the key point, why he picks specifically Kant and not other thinkers. And why precisely in Kant? Because Kant says, okay, we can describe the universe without an explanation external to the universe. So the question of the first impulse in German is
Erste Anstoß.
yeah, exactly. Okay. And in that sense, I would say that Kant limits old-fashioned metaphysics and then enables natural sciences to pursue their own research. This is, I think, why he picks specifically Kant.
Okay, and that's the point you were making before about what you say about epistemology, but
Yeah, maybe
the delineation of the proper domain of the natural sciences.
Yes, precisely, dividing the proper domain. So natural sciences describe the interactions between entities, and on the other, without questioning the first impulse.
Yeah.
And I feel that this is the revolution.
And so this is like the it's, you know, the
even if it's critical,
denying faith to make room for knowledge kind of thing. That's what he's also doing here, because the whole question of the erste Anstoß, I mean, this is pre-critical, but that's what he's doing, Kant, if that's how we're reading this text, distantly. Because the whole question of the erste Anstoß is about theology, right? It's about
precisely. And so he abolishes the theology at all,
that's
interfering in
and that's
realms.
why.
That makes sense also because he just contrasts it with Newton before in the sense that basically, so we had an advance with Copernicus and then it was like a retrogression with Newton because he needed something to start the clock work.
Yeah.
Or something, so I mean,
Yeah.
But I just, because I haven't read that Kant piece, I don't actually know what
Me
he says.
neither. I'm sorry, me neither.
It sounds
we-
like what you're saying.
We're all having to sort of like imagine what is that?
We're looking for something.
based on 2 or 3 sentences from Engels, you know. So I'll try and read it.
I have mainly quickly looked it up in Wikipedia. And,
Well done.
We're becoming scientific.
and the thing that there's just this very specific theory that Kant develops that belief in some other thinker, but maybe Engels didn't know that there was one person before Kant that kind of developed this theory, which is called the nebula theory, and it explains how stars came to be
Yeah.
through some gaseous
Gravitational. Yeah.
gravitational thing.
Oh.
So I don't think if I read that text I would be able to explain it better. But yeah, so I think it's just like literally he writes a history of thinking of the origin about the origin of the universe, and that's where after Copernicus who already kind of gave us a less theological perspective, it kind of gains a basis in which we can think it without any origin, any original force. That this very theory, particular as it was, and the details that I don't know, just kind of explains it in the scientific way.
And so we're out here, we're talking about the coming into being of phenomena in time, natural phenomena in time, and he's talking about, you know, stars and planets and things like that. And then on the following page, on 317, German version, we come down to Earth. So he's giving us an account of the way, you know, the ways in which, in the different domains in which this new dynamic way of understanding nature was developed. So then we get Cuvier, so geologists. So we've got the sort of cosmic dynamism. Then we get geologists, and Cuvier in particular, he sort of refers to Cuvier as revolutionary in phrase and reactionary in substance, kind of. Because again, here he's talking about Cuvier's theory of catastrophism, so Cuvier's discovery of fossilized elephant bones, and he tried to explain that to a theory according to which a flood of a sort of, you know, quasi-biblical character had killed large, you know, had covered large portions of the earth and killed lots of these prehistoric animals. And again, that's a kind of theological explanation for the data. And then he talks about Charles Lyell, so again, a precursor of Darwinian evolutionary theory in the realm of geology, I guess, who was a an anti-catastrophist, what was it called? Not gradualism, but uniformitarianism or something, Charles Lyell's theory. Anyway, it was a gradualist theory of
Evolution.
yeah, extinction in particular, yeah. Okay. And this, he argues, was even more incompatible with the old idea of unchanging species, right? So, yeah. And so then on page 319, you get a long excursus on biology. In which he's talking about, the theorization of the data. So in the 18th century, it was still, or in the early 18th century, in the 17th century, it's still a case of just collecting data and beginning to compare, and then throughout the course of the 18th and the 19th century, people are theorizing this data, and then that sort of culminates in Darwin, he says. And again, I mean, here he makes an interesting point. I mean, one question that I think is quite interesting in this is, obviously this is to an extent, it's like he's trying to give an internally differentiated, monistic account of the world, right, of reality. But I'm interested in how he sort of avoids reductionism, I guess. So, because here at the bottom of page 319, he sort of talks about Darwinian evolutionary theory and cell theory, which are two of the big, along with the second law of thermodynamics, they're the three big kind of discoveries that he's interested in. He says, damit war sowohl die Kluft zwischen anorganischer und organischer Natur auf ein Minimum reduziert. So these new developments in biology also reduce the distance between the sort of laws that govern inorganic and organic nature, he says. But he's not going as far as Ford, I think last week, who wanted to say that, you know, ultimately physical laws take precedence over all others. So it's just something that I'm quite interested to keep an eye on, like where he seems to be on that issue.
Well, he does mention the same problem in the notes on biology, where he says that, I think, that exactly the organic matter is infinitely brought closer to inorganic matter with the process of decay and the composition of the dead organic matter. So he does want to bridge this very, very strongly and explicitly.
Yeah.
And it also seems to me one of this bricks that he kind of lays for kind of this juggling between the life as we know it now, the possibility of death, and the possibility of maybe a very different
social life,
Social life,
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's when he talks about spontaneous generation, isn't it? In the notes on biology.
So yes, I don't remember.
Yeah, well, we can hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit about those as well. So we've kind of got to the end of the history of science with that, where he talks. So the final words, die neue Naturanschauung war in ihren Grundzügen fertig. Now that we've got sort of Darwinian evolutionary theory, alles Starre war aufgelöst, alles Fixierte verflüchtigt, alles für ewig gehaltene Besondere vergänglich geworden, die ganze Natur als im ewigen Fluss und Kreislauf sich bewegend nachgewiesen. Okay, so we've got this like fully dynamic conception of nature. And again, these two things, Fluss and Kreislauf, yeah? Flow on the one hand, but also circle, or cycle, sorry, on the other. I think there's somehow a tension between those things here for Engels. Now, here was on page 321, so now he goes into the sort of, cosmic history of the universe. Page 21, he says that, 321, sorry, he says, von chemischen Verbindungen der Elemente kann selbst bei einer Temperatur, wie sie heute noch die Sonne hat, keine Rede sein. So, chemical connections of elements can't take place at temperatures like those we find in the sun. And I'm like, but fusion is a chemical reaction, right?
Fusion is not.
Pardon?
Fusion.
Nuclear fusion.
I think it's a physical reaction.
It's a physical reaction.
I think. Yes.
Okay, fine. That was my question. I was like, isn't nuclear fusion a chemical reaction? But no, maybe it is a physical reaction. That's helpful. Then Engels is not talking rubbish there. As I'm told he was. Okay. So what do people think about this next section, where he's sort of giving us a speculative history of the universe here? So there's some overlap here, isn't there? And we can maybe move on a minute to the essay about work and evolution, but there's some overlap between this and that text. He's talking about the hand as the first tool, the evolution. And I think that's really, it's striking to me, that really genuinely dialectical sort of relationship between the, obviously these things can't be separated for him, but the natural and the social. Like, evolution brings about the hand in its specifically human form, but the hand he describes as the first tool. So the hand itself is already a social object, if you like, which then brings about, new transformations that have an impact on the physiology of the human being, which I think is an enlightening idea. That really, that really sort of pushes Darwin's theory in a productive new direction. Like, it's definitely, he's sort of on board with evolutionary theory there, but he's trying to do something new with it. I think it's quite compelling. Another comment that I had about this section was this idea, I think it comes up again later, of unintended consequences. Right? I thought that was quite. I found it quite surprising the extent to which he placed emphasis on the unintended consequences, because just thinking about what you said before, Lydia, about the sort of ideological, the reputation, I suppose, that this text has got, a lot of which I think comes from its edition history, because it was first put together as a book by Ryazanov in the Soviet Union, and it had a sort of ideological function in that context as well, which I think is partly where it gets its reputation from as a very, as a very unsophisticated work. But of course, it has been argued that this is a very deterministic sort of theory that Engels developed here. And so from that point of view, I was also surprised to see how much she emphasises the contingent and the unintended consequences of various changes, evolutionary or social changes. Did you have thoughts about that, Karen?
Yeah, I was just wondering though if he didn't mean it as I'm just looking for a right quote though, because I had this feeling when I was reading this section, this paragraph, that he meant it as a kind of comment on the fact that although human history is much more dependent on humans, and we as humans are masters of nature, not slaves, which are like, oh,
Yeah.
well, to take the master thing very, very seriously. So that I kind of felt like it was a comment on the fact that although we are the masters of our history, it still is not perfect, and it still we find ourselves in this position in which it has failed us, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that, we are, as masters of history, as our history, kind of the creators of our own cages or whatever.
Right, okay, yeah.
Which obviously wasn't really said here, so I'm going to look for the right quote to maybe come up with
But
it.
I read it in the same way, but I think that he is also quite explicit on which unintended consequences he's thinking about. I think he's talking about the effects of capitalism and the exploitation of workers, and so these kind of
Yes, that's true.
unexpected
That's right.
or unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Because, so it's one thing to have this contrast between, so it seems like as science progresses we could be more and more conscious of the possible effects of an activity, but then it seems like you're saying, well actually in a capitalism or production, the intention is not to think about the consequences.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, in the other text, he says that in a way capitalists care about just the immediate consequences.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
And this is his critique on them, I think.
And there's a parallelism between that image and the image of the animal, you know, that doesn't think, you know, it's almost, it's a dehumanizing image of the, you know, the capitalist. Because he talks about how animals don't have foresight and they just, you know, act on instincts and so on. So
It's like that, the relation between, so the communist and the capitalist is the one, is the same between the capitalist and the animal.
yeah, yeah.
Which is a strong claim.
That's a very strong claim. I mean, I think it remains very implicit. In
Yeah,
animals,
it's implicit,
but it's there. Yeah. No, and I think here also, so you're absolutely right, Federico, you know, he's talking about specific unintended consequences which have to do with exploitation. And I think when he talks here about Darwin, you know, he doesn't, Darwin wusste nicht, welche bittere Satire auf die Menschen, besonders auf seine Landsleute, schrieb, als nachwies, dass die freie Konkurrenz, der Kampf ums Dasein, den die Ökonomen als höchste geschichtliche Errungenschaft feiern, der Normalzustand des Tierreichs ist. I mean, there's also a connection here to an implicit critique of social Darwinism, I think, that by now is, you know, has definitely taken root in Germany pretty strongly. So maybe let's just look at the very last paragraph of the introduction before we move on to the other stuff. So, we should talk about this for quite a while. That last paragraph, I find it really striking because it is So he's talking here about the eternal cycle in which matter moves, a cycle in which, so I've only got a German, so I feel like I'm reading out too much in German, but I have to just read what I've got in front of me. Ein Kreislauf, in dem die Zeit der höchsten Entwicklung, die Zeit des organischen Lebens und noch mehr die des Lebens selbst und naturbewusste Wesen ebenso knapp bemessen ist wie der Raum, bla bla bla. Ein Kreislauf, here we are, in dem jede endliche Daseinsweise der Materie, sei sie Sonne oder Dunstnebel, einzelnes Tier oder Tiergattung, chemische Verbindung oder Trennung, gleicherweise vergänglich und worin nichts ewig ist als die ewig sich verändernde, ewig sich bewegende Materie und die Gesetze, nach denen sie sich bewegt und verändert. So this is this very mechanistic image that brings, that brings him quite close to the more mechanical materialism that we discussed in last week. Obviously, he's an opponent of that view, but in spots like this, you do kind of see where the deterministic kind of the objection to determinism is valid, especially where he sort of makes the point that where does he say it now? Wir haben die Gewissheit, dass die Materie in allen ihren Wandlungen dieselbe bleibt, dass keins ihrer Attribute je verloren gehen kann und dass sie daher auch mit derselben eisernen Notwendigkeit, iron necessity, womit sie auf der Erde ihre höchste Blüte, den denkenden Geist, wieder ausrotten wird, ihn anderswo und in andere Zeit wieder erzeugen muss. So, you get this idea that the apocalyptic image that you talked about, Caroline, it's all going to come to an end. Matter has produced this amazing flourishing thing called the human mind, which is going to disappear at one point, but it will it will create that again somewhere else. It's a very certain sort of image. It's quite striking.
And that sounds like this ending paragraph, it didn't seem to me deterministic at all.
You didn't? No.
I kind of thought that like the whole idea behind bringing everything down to the smallest, to the most indifferentiable matter that just moves was exactly to set it free from any intention behind it, from any push towards any specific movement, and that was just this kind of picture in which the matter just moves and changes, and this is the basic kind of element of how the world develops, and then something will evolve from it, and then something will disappear, but like it will always kind of move.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, and I think that is probably that I would want to hold on to that as well. I guess it's just this language of iron necessity and the expectation. I mean, he's obviously got he's got organic metaphors in here, and he's got sort of more industrial sort of metaphors working together. But this real certainty that wherever human mind is going to disappear, but something like this will emerge somewhere else in the cosmos for sure, because that's just the progressive, drive within the process. Which
I somehow read it as just this kind of almost already transition to a political statement in which he just kind of says we will drive ourselves towards a total destruction. We need to believe in a scientific way, but we need to believe that this leap of faith is something that will benefit the world in general, I guess. And that getting rid of capitalism is good.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think that this, it is,
or rather maybe that there is a rationale. There's like this thing that maybe is most most tempting in capitalism, which is a sense of rationality behind it,
Yeah.
that it can emerge in a different form. Maybe this could be read like that.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely can be read like that. And I think, right, I totally agree that that is, at that point, it's very clear that there's a political motivation connected to what he's talking about in the sciences. Definitely.
I've also read this not in a deterministic way, but maybe also because at the top of page 326, he writes something about the transformations which are inherent to the matter itself. And I think that this is the one of the key passages when he differentiates his thought from the one of a deterministic mechanistic materialism. And so it's precisely because there's not just a chain of cause and effects, a deterministic chain of effects, but it's the matter itself moving by the means of herself.
Yeah.
That we can escape determinism.
Yeah.
What to say?
I think that's a very good point.
If I can have one more comment on that, I think. It was really just striking to me how also one's separating, in a sense, the inorganic and organic matter, and then bringing them back together. He kind of stands on the side of the inorganic matter. That, like, if we think about it in political terms, he says there can be a different rationality, so there can be maybe a different political system. But the organic matter kind of disappears from that picture whatsoever. So this, I could imagine that. I mean, like this. Maybe this is kind of my very own perspective, because when I'm reading this kind of biological thought, what I'm looking for is a way in which the separation between the mind and body is represented, in a sense, also a specific account of the masses or the people that is very often kind of equated with this very mass, but that this is no emancipatory potential for some political subject that wouldn't be exactly rational. No? Like the matter will move in this exactly mechanistic way, and then the different rationality a different consciousness can arise, but that there is no force of the proletariat, at all there to me. And I wonder why.
I think that's a good question. And I mean, in a way, that whole sort of, this whole constellation is at the root of different conceptions of Marxist political theory, right? So there's more structuralist accounts, Althusser or something like that is more on the side of the inorganic, history's got a dynamic and you don't really need to sort of have a conscious subject to take action or whatever. I think that the metaphors there are interesting, because he's got the highest blossom, which he always talks about. The human mind has been the highest blossom, highest fruit or whatever of the material process, and then at the same time you've got this sort of iron necessity. So he is trying to bring those two together, the organic and the inorganic again, isn't he?
Kind of does go well with this first thing that we talked about, which was that he really thinks of science in this form of those old wise men that kind of govern it, that it really doesn't have this element that was, I think, that we were able to find in Pock last week. This
more social.
Yes, more like kind of direct and social vision of how society can work together.
Yeah. Well, maybe, I mean, let's look at the Anteile der Arbeit essay, because that's a bit more mesocosmic in the sense that it's about human evolution and the social, the role of work in relation to the social. I have to say, I really liked this essay. I did enjoy reading it. I thought it was quite sort of written a bit like a fairy tale, do you know what I mean? It's like, once upon a time there was a hand, and then there was, you know, then there was society. Are there any particular bits of this that people want to pick up on? I mean, there's something very Aristotelian about all of this, isn't there? Like, the concept of work. I mean, matter is doing work, right? That's what it's doing, it's working. And it's creating all these things, including us. And then work makes the human being as well. So the hand comes back. We read that just in a moment. The invisible hand becomes visible. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting here in relation to Darwin is that he talks about this the law of the correlation of growth. Is that the English name for that phenomenon?
Yeah, correlation of growth.
Law.
Yes, low correlation.
Yeah. So this is a you know, part of the text where it's really where he's drawing very specifically on something quite precise from Darwin. So this idea that one organ in an organism is connected to the development of another organ in ways that are just not really precisely specifiable, but you see a correlation of particular types of organ forms in, you know, morphologies in different species. And he seems to be sort of using that and extending that idea, really. Well, I mean, he's using the idea, he brings the hand and the head into conversation with one another. So there's something specific about the human hand and the human mind that have worked together in the process of labour to create the human being, and that is an evolutionary process, like a natural evolutionary process as well as a social one. So I thought that was quite striking and interesting. What about the account of language that he gives on page 447?
Humans, because it's under the humans had something to communicate.
Yeah.
So they developed speech.
Yeah. So again, so here it's like the mouth and the hand are working together, kind of. And,
I mean, it's consistent with the theory of the organ, you know,
Yeah.
of organ development. But
Yeah.
this is again another mystery, which refers song or speech.
yeah.
And this is, I guess, a valid philosophical approach to a massive debate since ever always.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems like he's assuming that they don't talk to each other, so when he talks about whether or not they can speak, he means like, can they speak to us or something? And then, so he's kind of presupposing.
Yeah, no, I mean it's highly speculative, right? I think that's clear. And what I sort of do like it. You've got to admire the kind of chutzpah, just kind of like saying this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely how it went down.
I mean, this is a sequence. This is a logical sequence. So it doesn't have to be the only one, I guess. If it's internally coherent, it can hold, I guess.
Yeah, no, but it's just like, here is this, that this description of the emergence of language out of and with the process of work is the only correct one. That can be proven by comparing with us with animals. It's like, okay.
And I mean, even in the beginning, humans stopped using their hands to walk, so that's how hands emerged, and then speech, and then tools. Tools for hunting, meat diet, greater independence, and so man rises above the animal kingdom. And then agriculture.
Yeah, so those are the sort of the way stations on the process of the becoming human of apes.
Oh, and society somewhere in there. I guess because we language. Yeah, and what distinguishes monkeys from humans is labor, in essence. The fact that hands developed too.
Yeah, I mean that's the basic argument, isn't it? Pretty much.
There's this curious moment when he mentions the meat diet.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he says sorry to vegetarians. He does say sorry to vegetarians, which I found very intelligent.
Does he?
Yes.
With excuses to vegetarians.
With all due respect to the vegetarians, man did not come into existence without a meat diet, and the latter, among all peoples known to us, had led to cannibalism at some time or other. The forefathers of the Berliners, the Schwarzkopfians or Wiltsians, I don't know, used to eat their parents as late as the 10th century. That is no consequence to us today.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
I'm just really thinking if this is not kind of the moment of irony in this text, because I found it also very particular, this fragment in which he seems to suggest that the meat diet has gained us a leisure time. I mean, I'll just read out a quote. Okay, so a meat diet, a meat diet contained in an almost ready state the most essential ingredients required by the organism for its metabolism. By shortening the time required for digestion, it also shortened the other vegetative bodily processes that correspond to those of plant life, and thus gained further time, material, and desire for the active manifestation of animal life proper. And then,
this is part of the argument that is still being put forward by certain evolutionary anthropologists and primatologists, which is, I suppose, from a just purely anecdotal, empirical point of view, you can see it. Like, monkeys spend all their time eating, literally all their time. And
They have nothing better to do.
well, I don't know whether I would think they don't have anything better to do. I mean, clearly, like, trying to create communism. That's what they should be doing, not sitting around chewing on bamboo. But so there was some experiment I watched on TV about this as well, like where people were just eating plant matter, and so people were like raw, like plants, and the point was to prove that you have to spend all your time eating in order to get the calorie content that you require to sustain yourself. So there are still scientists making this argument that cooking food in particular and eating protein-rich food had an important part to play in the evolution of higher order activities. Not necessarily by, I think the implicit claim is more that it saves us time, but he's making that more front and centre, isn't he?
So paradoxically, we need Pret-a-Manger to process communism.
Yeah, paradoxically. That's a dialectic. Yeah. It's part of the eternal cycle.
It does though bring the Fox-bill here, the higher principle of
You are
changing the social order.
based on food.
Yes.
Exactly. No, I thought the same thing. So there's definitely a connection to that idea.
I mean, there are some strange assertions like tribes developed into nations and states, law and politics arose, and religion. The part about religion is a bit strange because ancient religion existed,
Yeah.
you know, forms of early myth religion and all that. But again, I will say that apart from all these leaps, I do believe that with a bit more work, it could have, you know, if you covered the ground, it could have sort of made its own intrinsic sense for what he wanted to say, which is that we've learned to think only about the mind and we overlook manual labor. So maybe we need to shift the focus and look at this aspect, among other aspects of how humans evolved, to think about how important hands were and how important labor was for the development, which I think is valid, right?
Yeah, it's a point. I personally think it's a completely valid point. I think that, you know, and he makes the point compellingly enough, I would say, given, you know, with the tools we've got. Yeah.
I'm almost wondering if it's not almost like a Hegelian structure of progress in which he kind of repeats the same images and then kind of they bring us maybe closer to communism, of course. I mean, with the cannibalism resulting from a meat diet, which also gives us more time, it seems like capitalism does have a lot of parallel to it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
It's just kind of strange.
I mean, his comparisons are very selective. There are animals that are meat eating and they don't have time.
Yeah, of course. Like this is why it's so.
But he
that's
talks
why
about
I'm sure he knows that.
But he
animals eat
specifically,
meat as
that's
well.
why I wanted to really point up, die Fleischkost führte zu zwei neuen Fortschritten von entscheidender Bedeutung. Zur Dienstbarmachung des Feuers und zur Zähmung von Tieren. So when he's talking about the meat diet, he's pairing it with cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely, it's not just about eating meat, because other animals also eat meat, but it's about cooking food as well. I think that is central.
Well, the meat diet led to new advances of decisive importance.
Yeah.
Cooking takes
So,
Yeah. So meat eating comes first,
yeah.
then the use of fire as to cooking,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously use fire for other things, but and the domestication of animals, which obviously points to the direction of agriculture, doesn't it? So,
yeah, he's creating a different linear pathway to civilization.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that the text breaks off, so the manuscript's incomplete just as he's getting into talking about social formations, you know, so where that would have, what exactly his argument is at that level isn't clear from what we've got in the text, unfortunately, because I think you're right that there are some, you know, there are questions there about what is the political point of this then.
Yeah, this reads like a first draft in which he tried to put everything together, because then he has this part about potatoes and distilling spirits that killed the indigenous American people in Columbus, which is, it's a shame.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the point here, so this connects to what you were just saying, Artemis, and also to the point that we made about Newton, the Newton quote. So on page 451, this idea he's talking about, so that this idea of human history is essentially driven by thought, by the development of rational thought or something like that. This view, sie, herrscht noch so sehr, dass selbst die materialistische Naturforscher der darwinischen Schule sich noch keine klare Vorstellung von der Entstehung des Menschen machen können, weil sie unter jenem ideologischen Einfluss die Rolle nicht erkennen, die die Arbeit dabei gespielt hat. So, he's arguing that, you know, precisely this upside down view of things, or one-sided view of things, is detrimental to evolutionary theory, in particular when it's applied to humans.
What I find interesting in this quote, and also the image of the head and on one side and the hand on the other side, one against the other, is that he, on one hand, he overturns this relation, but in so stressing the importance of the hand, of the labor, but without saying that there's a deterministic consequence of labor. So if we stick to this image, to the image of the hand, and we put together this quote here from page 451, with a quote from the introduction, which I found just interesting. Yes, at page 323. So here when he's talking about the development of the humankind out of from apes, from monkeys, he wants to stress throughout the whole essay the importance of labor and the importance of the need and not rather than thought. But not in a deterministic way, and we can see it here by page 323, when he says, die Hand allein hätte die Dampfmaschine nie fertiggebracht, hätte das Gehirn des Menschen sich nicht mit und neben ihr und teilweise durch sie korrelativ entwickelt.
Yeah.
So also stressing just the hand, so stressing just the let's say the material aspect of the evolution, we cannot understand how we come to this grade of development without the ideal part. And this is, I think, the interesting and the value also of this point of view, which is not just turning idealism upside down, but also acknowledging the importance of idealism and so the Kopf.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that I mean, he really is, I think, you know, you're right, he sort of puts the emphasis more on the hand, you know, just even rhetorically, but he's stressing the interplay between these things, and based on that law, I mean, with the appeal to the law of correlation of growth, right, to Darwin's law of correlation of growth in the background. And then later on page 451, he says, you know, human beings move further away from animals, the more their character takes on, the more they take on the character of planning beings, right? So this again is stressing in the head, I suppose, right, rather than hands. So the ability to plan, intentionality, and so on. So yeah, he's really. And the quote that I wanted to read out, which goes back to the Newton thing, was not the one that I just read out, but we can put it down. He says, jedes wirkt aufs andere und umgekehrt, und es ist meist das Vergessen dieser allseitigen Bewegung und Wechselwirkung, das unsere Naturforscher verhindert, in den einfachsten Dingen klar zu sehen. So here he's saying that, you know, separating things out and focusing on, you know, one aspect of reality or one aspect of the evolutionary process, rather than seeing things in relation to one another, is problematic and leads to sort of false conclusions and things. So he's obviously trying not to do that. But, you know, that's obviously, the special sciences have done exactly that. They focus on a particular region of reality, which Engels probably might argue is an ideological thing to do.
I asked a question on this essay. It seems to me that at the end, at page 400, 153, when he stresses the unity of mankind and nature. In a way, he is proposing a paradox. Because on the one hand, he stresses the differentiation of man from animals and so from animals from inorganic matter and so on. So there's this growing distance between humankind and the animal, and he stresses this difference, saying that labor is the main means of this distanciation. But on the other hand, he says that only with becoming conscious and only only becoming aware of this, man could be one with nature. And I wonder whether this is again another dialectic moment in his thought, or it's just a paradox. So the more distant from animals and inorganic matter we are, the more close to it we are. What would you?
For me, this connects to the goats.
How?
Because he makes this argument about how humans are above animals now, but they're destroying their natural environment, and unless humans learn to adapt. And so in this sense, like, he says that goats eat all their natural environment and then they migrate. And so humans, they are above the natural environment, but at the same time, they need to become conscious of the fact that it's unsustainable for their development. So they need to be conscious of their place within nature, even though they are above it in theory. And in this sense, he compares them with other animals.
So I think the way that I connect the 2 points that you're making a little more closely is to say that through the process of becoming, differentiating ourselves from the rest of the animal world, we are coming to realise the destructive effects, potentially destructive effects that we can have on our environment on which we depend, and that process, if we are able to manage it, might result in us becoming, more harmonious with the rest of the natural world. So in a way, kind of rejoining our place in it. I mean, that's the way I understand what he's saying there. And again, he does that by referring to unintended consequences. So at the bottom of page 452, he says, so it's this bit where he talks about animals only using their environment and humans mastering the environment. And then he says, but let's not flatter ourselves too much with all of this talk about human triumph over nature. For every such triumph, it gets its revenge on us. So everybody has seen, and he goes on to sort of, everybody's seen the consequences that we have to count with, the completely unforeseen effects that the initial action might have. So, has anyone got that in English? Because I haven't got it in English.
Which part do you mean?
Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. So each victory is true in the first place, brings about the results we expected, but in the second and third places it has quite different unforeseen effects, which only too often cancel the first. The people who in Mesopotamia, Greece, Asia Minor and elsewhere destroyed the forests to obtain cultivable land never dreamed that by removing, along with the forests, the collecting centres and reservoirs of moisture, they were laying the basis for the present forlorn state of those countries. So this is, where his ecological thinking becomes obvious. When the Italians of the Alps used up pine forests on the southern slopes, so he's describing the process by which work, which emancipates us from nature, if you like, also alienates human beings from nature, and thereby reveals to us our embeddedness in the natural world, right?
So then you must slave dialectic.
Yeah.
And then in the next page, he does the same for society, in essence, doesn't he? And he says, When Columbus discovered America, he did not know that by doing so, he was giving a new lease of life to slavery.
Yeah.
Which is an analogy.
Yeah, so he then turned it the other way around. Yeah, that's right.
So is this unity between man and nature, or mankind and nature, to be understood as a harmonious relation between them, in this sense?
The unity that exists, or the unity that he is projecting?
Yeah, this is what I wonder. So when he talks about, so je mehr diese Arbeit geschieht, desto mehr werden sich die Menschen wieder als eins mit der Natur nicht nur fühlen, sondern auch wissen. So in English, the more this happens, the more we are aware of the consequences of our work. The more will men not only feel but also know their unity with nature. Is this unity just the harmonious relation between man and nature, mankind and nature, or is this unity in the sense that we all are made of matter? Or is it the same? Yeah?
Well, I mean, I think he is comfortable expressing the idea of unity by saying that we're all made of matter. I mean, I think that's what, it's kind of what he's saying. But what is that problem? Like, what is that problem?
Because it stresses also the differentiation of mankind from animal.
Sure, but this concept of matter that he's working with is internally, infinitely differentiable, right? It differentiates itself. That's what it does. But it is the same stuff.
Okay.
Like, it's the same elements, chemical elements, it's the same, that seems to be his understanding of it. Here he's saying that it's the progress in science which is going to put us more and more in the situation to be able to recognise the unintended consequences of our mode of production, the way that we produce and work on the environment. I mean, as it happens, it's actually the climate that's doing that. It's like, we've got, it seems in the contemporary context, we've got the scientific knowledge and scientists are telling us what's happening there, but it's actually, the floods and it's the material side of things that seem to be pressing on us just as much, so he doesn't see that quite. Anyway, well, we didn't get to talk about the notes on biology. I think they were quite interesting. Does anyone want to say anything about that short preface by Haldane? Like, whether people have any thoughts on that before we finish? I mean, I was just interested in his comment that, because he's a biologist, he thought that, Engels that the sections of the book that deal with biology are the most immediately valuable today. And I just sort of wondered what he was thinking of there, because he's not really specific.
Well, I mean, like the theory of kind of cultural evolution is quite well recognized nowadays. I think that's what he wants to. Because I have something that unfortunately my computer inside, so I can't look up the quote, but he did mention especially Engels' comments on as somehow eye-opening, or that could have been eye-opening if only he had read them before.
That's right. Good, well look, I found that a really helpful discussion of those texts, so thanks for everybody's contributions, and next week we'll be reading, what are we reading next week? Next week we're working on socialism and Darwinism and social Darwinism. So we'll be looking at, so we've got some stuff from Haeckel, and then we've got 2 texts, one by Ludwig Waldmann, who is a race scientist and Marxist theorist, so really tries to bring those 2 things together with the kinds of results that you can probably imagine. And then Julius Schaxel, who was Haeckel's last student, who went on to become to teach in the Soviet Union. He also taught in Jena for many years. And he was a social democrat. He's set up the journal Urania in 1944, which was a popular scientific journal that was specifically targeted at workers and social democrats. So it had it aimed to target the sort of proletarian version of the kind of back to nature movement, I guess, in Germany. And then there's I've put one secondary text there by Richard Weikert on the origins of social Darwinism in Germany, but I will put another one up by Nick Hopwood, which talks a bit about this context of workers' scientific organisations in Romania and stuff, because that might be interesting too. Sorry to give more reading, but only if you want me to. Okay, so see you for that next week, and then as usual we'll go to the rhymes on now.
Yay! Yes, that's
Do you have any suggestions on a more compressed reading list for the next? Because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have to read all 100 pages, which I would love to, but I guess
For next week?
Yeah.
Okay, so read, so I mean the Ludwig Waldmann that I put up, I put more than I said we should read, so there was less of that. I think perhaps read the Schaxel, and then maybe the second literature would be helpful this time. Yeah, and I'll put that Nick Hopwood one as well. Thank you.